Welcome to the February 2nd Village Board Work Session. The televised portion of this meeting is now called to order. We'll begin with the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to begin by saying happy birthday to Trustee Levin. We're so excited to be spending the day with her, and I know it'll be a celebratory evening for us all, just being together. I will begin with one calendar announcement, putting on my documentary and discussion series hat. Do you think you're going to make it?
Tomorrow, right?
Excellent, yes, tomorrow.
I will do my best.
Well, then you don't get your name on the panel if you're just going to do your best, but you will be part of the discussion because everybody always is at the documentary and discussion series. And this is a special format, and it's actually a special month because this is our second one this month. The first screening we had was a couple of Fridays ago in a partnership with the Riverkeeper. It was extremely well attended, and we look forward to another slight variation on our usual format. We are working with a couple of the teachers from Ossining High School who teach a class called Racism, Sexism, and Classism. It's one of the SUNY classes, and we have invited the teachers as well as another educator / parent in the district to be part of our panel. We've also invited current and past students from the class to be part of the panel. We'll begin by watching a documentary called What's Race Got to Do with It, and then we will move into having a discussion that has the same parameters and will be similar to an exercise that they do with the class, but in this case it will involve not just students but anyone in the community who joins us tomorrow, Thursday the 23rd of February at the Ossining Library in the Bedars Theater. The program begins at 6:30. And I have one more serious topic to discuss, and of course it's related to the roundabout. When we began consideration of the roundabout just over a year and a half ago, there were a lot of substantive questions like how will this impact parking? Or will this affect the historic character of the village? Or will pedestrians even be safe? Unfortunately, the rhetoric, particularly on Facebook, has deteriorated to include some misleading statements and false accusations. And those messages hit an all-time low this weekend. A leader from the Chamber of Commerce and the anti-roundabout movement posted on his page accusations that village officials were threatening people who might sign the petition. Someone commented then on the thread, "Aren't you an ex-cop? Probably still have a pistol. Take care of it." That comment was followed by another that said, "Make them an offer they can't refuse." I don't know the two men who made those comments. However, I do know most of the next 9 people who commented on that thread. Some of them are local business owners. Some are people I have called friends. Our children have played together. We have been to each other's homes, and one of them served on this board with me. And not one of those people spoke up and said, "Hey, making jokes about gun violence against public officials is inappropriate." Sadly, we live in a society where a fake news story can lead to a mentally ill person shooting up a pizza shop. We are talking about an infrastructure project. It's an intersection upgrade. Our engineers presented us with a situation that needed to be fixed. In the past year and a half, we have done our best to listen to every concern and address it in now over a dozen public meetings. And we will continue to do our best to serve the interests of the public and communicate accurate information to our residents and our local business owners. I do not believe that the anti-roundabout movement began with an intention to become a pro-gun violence movement. But this weekend, the angry rhetoric went too far. When opinions veer into threats of violence, those threats should be condemned. If people are opposed to the project, they can sign the petition. No one should feel intimidated either way. It diminishes this village if threats of violence are ignored and not challenged. Good government cannot be dictated by the loudest and angriest among us. My colleagues did not know I was going to make that statement. I don't know if they would like to follow up. If not, then I would turn it over to village manager.
Well, there's a democracy in this village, and we're following the process. At the meeting in which we decided to vote on the funding, in that same meeting, our village attorney made it very clear what the public recourse was to our decision. It's the permissive referendum. He told everybody exactly what they need to do and what needs to happen. And I don't know what's going to happen, but at the end of the day, that's the process. That's democracy. All of us here are here because we were elected by other people. They voted for us. We try to represent all of the village residents, and I certainly try and do that. So anybody, you know, the commentary around somehow we're bought and paid for, or we're hijacking the process, or something like that, very disappointing. Very disappointing to hear that stuff. Because none of us here are bought and paid for. Nobody tells me how to make my decision, how to think through it, how to make it happen for the decisions that I make. I do that myself because I spend the time, I come to the meetings, I do the research, and I care. I care about this village. I care about every single decision that I make. But to hear the things that people say on social media, it's just really, really disappointing. Really disappointing. And it hurts, frankly, because I guess I think better everybody. I'm a glass half full kind of person. I'd like to believe everybody would at least engage in the intellectual discussion and not waste our time with threats of violence or just unnecessary things that have nothing to do with the discussion. Nobody. There was a comment that somebody felt as though if they signed the petition that somehow there would be retribution from village government. Well, that's just ridiculous. That you know, I don't know why the person gave that reason, but that does not happen in village government, to my knowledge, not in the 5 years that I've been here. We're not perfect here. We're all trying to do better. But that's certainly nothing that happens here, not in my 5 years in village government. So I would hope that going forward that, you know, we would continue to have the debate and have the conversation. And we're all going to find out at the, you know, at the beginning of March what's going to happen with the permissive referendum. So let's allow that process to take place. Make your arguments, make your intellectual argument, make your passionate argument. I understand the passion part. So go out and do that. And if you can make that happen, then the next step in the process will take place. Thank you.
So I have to say, I also saw the Facebook comments over the weekend, and I didn't take certain comments as serious, but I will say that in no way, shape, or form should a roundabout lead to rhetoric of violence. But when I did see the comment about the building department, it actually made me think, and it made me think about maybe, and this comes back to our processes, that like we as village government, we don't take names. Like that's not a part of our, we don't do that. Like most of us work full time. But if people do feel that we do take names, or that you can get in trouble with the building department, then maybe this will be a time where business owners can know exactly what the building department is actually looking for. Because I feel like there might be that miscommunication. Because I think because that says to me that people think that the building department walks around and just does what they want. And that just made me think about the process. So that's one thing. But talking about democracy and how we made decisions, I actually do think we should look at this and take a chance to look at the process about how we make big decisions like this, because people are very passionate, people are very mobilized, and maybe going forward we should try to engage the public sooner than later. For example, we do what we're supposed to do. We've talked about it over 2 years. It's a part of the public meeting. But there's something about being good and appearing to be good. So while we may be good in our process of talking about this over 2 years, to appear to be good would mean that when we make major decisions like this, we engage the public earlier. Like we find ways to do that. That's not what open meetings law tells us to do, but we can do that, particularly when we're making decisions that may affect what people consider the fabric of our downtown.
Go ahead. I mean, I think that's, is it on? I just can't hear it, okay. I get where you're coming from, but at the end of the day, it's the use of social media and a gutless retort to democracy. Not by you, gutless for people to sit in their living room and spew out garbage, you know? Especially the person who did it, who's had every opportunity for 2 years to speak directly and openly. More disgraceful to me is the person's a member of the chamber and reposted that disgusting piece. It also prevents people who want to serve in public office from serving in public office. So it's not about all the stuff you just said, which took it into a different place for me. It's about the fact that when people want to serve in public office, things like this prevent them. Because at the end of the day, you know, who wants to have their life threatened? It's not about a roundabout. I don't care what it's about. It could be about a really big issue, an important issue for somebody else. Every issue is important to somebody that we deal with. You know, a name on a street for somebody is important. There is, you know, violence happens very quickly, very easily. You know, I think people who use social media to opine and to repost things without thinking, either the person wasn't thinking, so shame on him. He sits, he's a member of the board of the chamber, shame on them for not taking that down very quickly because they were all on it reading. Shame on all the people, because there are very few people in that group that don't know each other, for allowing that. And, you know, frankly, each person that thought it was just funny should have a son, daughter, a wife, a mother sit on this board and have somebody make fun of that, because there have been too many public officials who have been killed off of humorous, stupid comments by a bunch of stupid people. I happen to know the person who did the first post. So hopefully he's listening, because, you know, and I hope that people get the idea that it feels very much like a personal attack and not a public attack when that happens. I see absolutely zero excuse for anybody to post things that talk about the use of violence about any topic. And the fact that the people who know them didn't call up and say, take that post down, is actually, for me, a more disgraceful piece of this equation. And I challenge any of them to want to have their wife or their family member sit here and be treated like that. I don't read Facebook for that reason. I mean, I read my own personal stuff, but I stopped reading that stuff. So I, as a public official, stopped listening to that piece of the discussion, because they're not discussions. They're just mud being slung against the wall. And shame on all the people that didn't do something about it. Frankly, if people show up later for the roundabout, I would have preferred to have that discussion around the people that allowed that. And everything you said, John, is a part of how I feel about the use of social media and the gutlessness of the whole thing.
Well, I think everything was said by my board members, my colleagues. You know, what is interesting about this process is that we as elected officials, and whoever sits in these chairs, either past or future, as John mentioned, we are elected by the people, and we do represent the people, and we try to do the best of our ability to make our village a better place. And there's times that we have to make decisions that some people may not like, some people may like. In this case, is the roundabout. And in the near future could be about something different. And I think that's the important part of democracy, that the people think that may not have a voice. Well, they do have a voice. Even though the 5 people sit on this board and represent the community, we also need their input on this. So to me, there's definitely been a lot of negativity on some of the comments and misinformation of some of the facts that had been presented by this board, and they have been shared in our different media outlets that we have. You know, we still get emails, we still get phone calls, we still get people talking about it, and some of the, you know, what are we doing and how's this came to about. You know, it has been a process, and the process is going to continue until the petition is done. I want to see what happens at the end of the day, and I think that's the whole process that we are part of it. People getting, you know, being threatened because they don't, you know, they think that the building department or village officials are going to go against their business. To me, that's just something silly. You know, that is not what government is about. Maybe in other countries, maybe in other cities, not in Austin, none of us. You know, we want businesses to grow. We want businesses to be better. We want to be better than any other municipality that is in Westchester, New York State itself. And those are the things that we try to incorporate in an everyday life in here. So I'm disappointed to see some of the comments. I saw some of that. I saw a few emails going about that. You know, I spoke to some people that actually were part of that, and they were very disappointed. Some people actually called some of the people, I guess, that were part of the trend and told them to take them down. You know, I really don't know the details of how did that came to be, but you know, I was born in a country where corruption and fatalities has happened to, you know, municipal government itself, and it's not pretty. You know, people think that it's not going to happen. Well, it happens. So violence is definitely something that should be off the table. That wasn't the topic of the conversation. The topic of the conversation was the roundabout and what Austin wants to see there. So I think they should focus on that and try to build that portion of the engagement to the community. So, you know, we're going to continue with this meeting. I have nothing else to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Board, good evening. Our first item on the regular agenda tonight is an update on the village-owned 200 Main Street parcel.
Sir, may I interrupt for one moment? I'm going to just completely recuse myself from the
The
conversation.
mayor has to
I will leave.
recuse herself from the
Okay.
the discussion.
For anybody who hasn't seen me do this before, my husband has business dealings with one of the people that the village is discussing this with.
Okay. With the mayor recused from the discussion on the 200 Main Street parcel, we wanted to update the public and the board this evening on a couple of things that have transpired since the preferred developer last made his presence to the board to update on the status of his work to date. One of the things that promulgated this, there was some activity there a couple of weeks back, at which point we called the preferred developer in to discuss what activities were taking place there, because he was given access to the locked door as part of the original agreement, and we brought him in to discuss various topics. And I'm going to let Stuart go into a little more detail, but I want to introduce it. One of them was his requirements to submit by a certain date to the Planning and Zoning Board and which Stuart will give those details as well. And also his requirement that he has as a preferred developer with the contract and some of the timelines associated therewith. So, keeping it simple, I'll turn it over to Stuart now.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, members of the board. Just as an update, following the meeting, I had conversations with the Preferred Developers Council, and recently the preferred developer wanted to conduct some testing at the location, and I was provided with a copy of a certificate of insurance. I advised the preferred developer that it was insufficient because it did not name the village as an additional named insured, and that was a prerequisite. Previously, there had been an issue with regard to potential demolition at the location, and I similarly advised the developer and his counsel of the need for specific language that would protect the village in the event that anything goes on there. I have not yet received an updated certificate of insurance, either with regard to the testing or with regard to the demolition. With regard to the planning board application, I can advise the board that the developer's architect did deliver the applications to the building department and planning department on February 14th, as was requested. The matter will be on before the planning board on the 28th. It is also, I believe, going to be before HPC at their March meeting, so that will be heard at that point. With regard to other discussions, I have been in contact with council with regard to certain issues relating to the contract, so that we can get certain terms revised, as we've had discussions with regard to that. But at this point, there is no work being done, and certainly until there are appropriate certificates protecting the village, particularly with regard to any abatement or testing, that work's not going to be done. So that's where we are at this point with regard to that. Hopefully I will have some further information from council with regard to getting the agreement revised. The timeline is, I think it was, if they had that in by February, they would have all their approvals within 8 months, and then after that they would go for their building permit. The proposal to them would be to shorten some of those time periods so that they can get their building permit quicker and start getting the construction going. And again, I've had discussions with council with regard to that and on some other issues. But the key thing, if they want, as to any testing, they need to provide the proper documentation to us, and at this point, that documentation has not been provided.
And to append that, before we open it up for discussion, there hasn't been, to my knowledge, and I don't believe to Stuart's knowledge, any objections to any of the requirements that we reestablished in the contract that has to be executed. So they're clear on what we're asking of them. It's not uncommon for us to ask them the things that we've asked, pre-demolition, pre-access, and we're allowing the planning board submittal to go on so they can maintain a parallel track so as not to put any more delay in implementation of this project than we've already experienced.
Anybody have any other comments or questions?
I guess my question will be actually for Lynn. Sorry. Lynn, so part of the application that was submitted on the 14 was any additional information on the drawings besides of what the preliminary set that was submitted a couple months back to us?
I haven't looked at it in detail, but there's a little bit more detail with respect to dimensions and measurements, but and they've submitted additional pictures of the site, and they've submitted a long EAF. So they've submitted additional paperwork, but I haven't
The
torn
design
apart the
itself
plans.
is still the concept that was presented
Yes,
to us.
the concept is still the same,
there.
yes.
Okay.
It's still a food
All right.
mart. And then they did a parking study, like their own, not official, so they've moved it forward to some degree.
So they're in front of
Stuart got the
architectural-
dates correct, yes. They're before the planning board on the 28th of February, and they're before the HPC on March 6th.
If I may, just for clarification, I don't think we're really anticipating too much architectural significant improvements because one of the prerequisites to more detailed architectural details was the demolition to expose the inside of the building to the architects so they can go and perform the same, which has not been done. So we really didn't expect much more as far as interior architectural renderings.
No, I understand that. I just wanted to see if anything big changed from, from the beginning, so to speak, so.
Okay.
As long as they're on track at this point, I think, I'm okay with that for now.
Any other questions?
I'm good.
Very good. Okay, so I think we're good. Thanks for the update. Thanks very much.
Okay. That concludes our discussion on 200 Main. And while he's getting his paperwork ready, I'll introduce the next topic. Andrew Teese is here this evening, our Water and Sewer Superintendent for the Village of Ossining. As the board knows, and for the public's information, the Village of Ossining Department of Public Works is also the administrator of the water distribution system, potable water distribution system in the town. And tonight's presentation is going to include a capital project request by Mr. Teese with regard to water main lining and replacement that he wishes to let for construction this summer. I'm sorry, design this year for next year. Andy?
Okay, thanks for having me. We have two projects before you. One, they're both in the town, and the first project I handed out an actual sketch. The first page, it shows the linear feet of what we're looking to do. It's Gordon Avenue, and it's Riverview Parkway. It's in the town, and it was a water main that was relined in the 1990s, and we've had quite a few breaks in the last few years on this entire line. We've broken it down into the priority area, and if we were to do the whole entire street from Gordon Avenue, it would be over 3,600 linear feet. I've broken it down to 2,235 feet because we've only had two breaks on the continuing section that's not highlighted to Chappaqua Road. So I didn't see that as a priority for right now. So normally, what we do is we look at the useful life of the pipe, and we look to see, we send that out to a lab, and we see if it needs to be replaced. I don't know if that was done back in 1990, but it's a clean pipe, but it's cast iron that breaks constantly, and it needs to be replaced. And that project, so we called Charles Maganaro Engineers, who we've used for a long time, and had him give us, we had to break this project up into two separate capital projects. The second project is the water main between Stormytown Road and Croton Dam Road, which is that the 12-inch water main break area that had the 400,000 gallon per day leak that went into the creek, that whole section. I'll talk about that one next. So I've asked for two separate proposals, and I've asked that we design both of these projects and get them board health approved this year and actually go to construction just on the Gordon Avenue section this summer. And the following summer, we would do the second project, which was the transmission 12-inch water main.
Forgive me, the transition 12-inch water main, meaning the
That-
Stormytown Road area, the
Yes,
9A?
yes, yep. And that's 1,900 linear feet. All of this requires above-ground bypass piping. So in order to maintain service to residents and for the transmission main, above-ground piping, just like the rest of the streets that we do in the village, need to be bypassed. And then the actual mains would be, the actual mains would be pulled out of the ground and would be reinstalled with new water mains in that same area, because you run into a lot of rock excavation areas, and we don't want to disturb a separate area. For the Gordon Avenue Riverview Parkway proposal, I have asked for an engineer's estimate and I have to say they're pretty accurate with what we've bid in the past. For that project, it's 1.364 million, and the actual design and construction is 192,700. On the project for the 12-inch transmission water main, that was budgeted to be $1,044,445 and change, and that project was estimated to be, well, it's not estimate, for $146,820, and that's for field services, that's for design, and that's for health department approval. That project would take 12 weeks of actual construction, field services, and the Gordon Avenue project would take, I believe, 15 weeks. So we could fit that into this year's, yeah, it is 15 weeks for Gordon Avenue, into this year's cycle. I've talked to our treasurer about fund balance, and if we could borrow, or should we take it out of fund balance for just the consulting services. He thinks that we should take it out of fund balance, but obviously we'd borrow for the whole job other than the consulting agreement.
And just for logistics, when Andy and I were discussing the consultant's agreement, we thought that we would get an economy of scale if we allowed the design to happen at the same time and then do the project staggered one summer and then the next summer. But the resolution that you'll be asking for next week will be a fund balance transfer from the water fund in advance of the resolution for execution of one contract to encompass the engineering for both stages of the capital project this summer and next, correct?
Correct.
Clarify that last part.
The design work that he's going to request a resolution.
Design and construction management is for
No,
both
I'm
projects.
sorry, design and construction management, soft costs. The resolution for both projects slated for this summer and next summer, the bricks and mortar, is going to be on next week for your consideration. Drawn from the fund balance in the water fund.
So that's the, so for the Gordon Avenue, you were saying the design is about 192, did you say?
For Gordon Avenue, it is
Yeah, you said 192 and 7.
192.
Okay, and then,
The other, and for the other project, it's 146.
so it's about $339,000 approximately.
The only thing that's not in here is the survey work. Now, I could have had them include the survey work, but then they would have to put profit and overhead. There's no reason to do that. We can pay them directly. So once we execute this, I'm getting the proposal for the survey work, and we'll deal with that separately. It's not a lot. That's
And Andy, for the public's edification, the estimated present water fund balance?
it's over $5 million.
And he's looking to the back of the room
Yeah.
where Tom is sitting. Our treasurer.
Thought it was closer to 6.
Say yes.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the Board of Trustees. We're getting to $5 million. Although the total fund balance is over $5 million, there's certain portions of it that are like classified as like unspendable, things like, prepaid for retirement, encumbrances, things like that, appropriated fund balance. As of the end of 2015, which is the last audited financial statements, we have about $4.7 million of the true excess fund balance. And for the 2016 year, it looks like that there'll be probably at least $1 million in unspent appropriations, much of which was budgeted for the purchase of water from New York City. A portion of that was, I think, reappropriated in the 2017 budget, but there's no doubt in my mind that it was a very good year for 2016. It's going to build the fund balance, and it makes sense to utilize that fund balance as a one-time charge to put it towards the capital project. And then when we're ready to issue the bond for the actual construction, at that time, we can ask for a bond resolution.
We We underspent roughly 980,000 under what we thought we would need to for that project for this year.
For the
for the purchase water.
For the dam project.
For the dam project. And also, because we reduced our leakage and unaccounted for water from 28% to 8%, that gives us an additional 600,000 a year that we haven't spent in purchased water. So you can see how the numbers work.
Are you about to say something?
Okay
There's
with this
nothing to
project.
say.
Thank you, Andy.
Okay.
I just want to clarify, since we've talking about the water fund, and it sounds like we've got millions of dollars that are just sitting there not being used. I'm glad that that we have the fund to be able to draw on for this portion of what is a very large job, and I assume we're going to bond for the upcoming, ultimately 2.8-ish million that we're talking about for the construction costs for both of these two projects. But as you started off by saying, these are projects that are in the town, and a lot of the correct me when I misspeak, a lot of the infrastructure work that has been done in recent years has been in the village, just because the infrastructure in the village has been in greater need of upgrades. And when it came to our attention a year or two ago that there was really some significant need in the town, in reviewing our agreement with the town, it became quite clear that because this is all part of one system, the infrastructure is just one infrastructure. While our board is responsible for appropriating the funds, we are responsible for the health and welfare of the water system for everybody in the village of Ossining and the unincorporated town of Ossining. And folks like our friend Stuart, who live in the unincorporated town of Ossining, actually contribute at a 1.5 times rate for every gallon of water that they purchase in their homes, which is the exact same water running through these pipes that we purchase in our homes in the village. But we are also dependent on having a completely well-functioning system to have safe, reliable water. So, thank you for moving this forward, and I look forward to the resolution for next week. Let me just clarify. You have it partially yellow and partially green because some of it was more urgent and had more evidence of breaks in the past than other portions of it. Could you explain to me the work that's planned for the summer? Is it just the yellow, or is it the yellow and the green?
No, it's the green and yellow.
Okay.
And down to where you see the cross arrow past Gordon Avenue, where it's labeled Gordon Avenue, to that point. There's an
Yep.
existing gate valve.
Up to that X in the circle, right?
Just the colored parts.
Yep.
The yellow stripe and the green stripe. Okay.
The other advantage for us waiting on the transmission main is that we're in negotiations with the state right now at the intersection for the water main work and what's going to happen there. And there might be some modifications to this project at that water main, where it goes underneath the culvert. And the state has agreed to change out the culvert, but we're planning on putting extra pipe there, so it's there for the future where we can tie in. So right now, it's kind of premature to start this work on the transmission main, so it makes sense to wait until that project's complete. Thanks.
Thank you for coming back and taking the time to explain it to us.
Thank you, Andy. The next item, the 8:30 topic. We're a little ahead of a schedule now because that went a little quicker than we thought. That's okay. Knock on wood. The 8:30 topic on this evening's agenda is entitled Revisions to Village Code Regarding Property Maintenance and Inspection and Local Code Enforcement. Our intent, Stuart and I have discussed this, is to make this a reoccurring topic until we really get it buttoned up. And that, as you know, is a work in progress, and we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight. But before Stuart updates you on what he's accomplished in the last week in this ongoing effort, I thought it appropriate to read to the board and so the public can get a sense of why we're doing what we're doing. I'd like to read a text I received by our code enforcement officer with regard to one of our latest buildings that required placarding and did not allow people to inhabit the building. It's regarding something that happened just this past Monday night. And I'm going to obviously edit out some details, but I did discuss reading this with Stuart, and it's okay to do that. It's to me from our code enforcement officer. I was called out by the Ossining Fire Department at about 10:30 p.m. Monday night because of an electrical fire. The fire started because of a short in a surge protector used in the attic, which was not code compliant for living space, and there was no record of the space to be approved for conversion into a habitable living space. There was one man, one woman, and an infant baby living there. The house had numerous electrical violations, including exposed wiring throughout the home and spliced extension cords to create lighting fixtures and switches that were stapled to the sheetrock on the walls and tapped into outlets. Upon entering the kitchen, there was the smell of gas. The fire department used a device to confirm the presence of gas. The fire chief contacted Con Edison to alert them. They arrived about a half hour after that. They confirmed that there was a gas leak and immediately shut the gas service to the home. Due to the electrical conditions, Con Edison informed me that they would have a crew come back to disconnect the electrical service as well. I called the water department to come out to turn off the water service to ensure of no broken pipes due to potential freezing while the house was unoccupied. A placard indicating that the house is not habitable was placed on the door. The residents of the house informed that they had family members that they could stay with until all the violations were cleared. The next morning, I received a call from the Red Cross indicating that the owner, Mrs. Thompson, reached out to them for assistance. I informed them of the situation concerning the house. They told me they would make a record of the situation and attempt to assist any of the residents that required help. Also, the house was registered as a single-family home. So this is unfortunately not uncommon, but it will be the never-ending goal as we go through this process of the adoption of 1203, which Stuart's going to go into a little bit more now, and all of the code revisions and the efforts that we're making in code enforcement and the building department and the permitting process. We're not going to stop until this stops. Stuart?
Thank you, Paul, and good evening, Mayor and members of the board. The amendments or revisions that we propose are very broad and cover, I would say, probably 6 or 7 chapters in the municipal code. In 2015, the board approved amendments to Chapter 91, adopting the Uniform State Code. And the first thing that we propose to do is to slightly amend that, because the Uniform Code now includes both the Uniform Code, which is all the international property codes, maintenance codes, and things like that, but also the State Energy Conservation Code. This becomes important because all buildings now must be compliant with the State Energy Conservation Code, and indeed, even though we will be proposing that 1203.3 be added to the Villages Code, I am advised that by the end of this year, 1203.3 will itself be amended to put in specific references to requirements under the State Energy Conservation Code in terms of what must be done with regard to that code. But we're not going to wait until that amendment comes in. We have proposals to go through, and I just want to go through some of them with you. Chapter 95 of our current code is the Building Demolition Code, or the Building Demolition Code of the Village of Ossining. The proposal will be to rename that to the Unsafe Building and Demolition Code of the Village of Ossining. That's because under 12033 there must be a specific section that relates to unsafe buildings and what occurs with unsafe buildings, how the buildings can be placarded, the reasons for the placarding, and the emergency actions that can be taken by building inspectors or code enforcement personnel. I'm going to use code enforcement personnel as a generic term here. That will include our assistant building inspectors as well as the code enforcement officers that we have. But that's just for purposes of how that's how the code has it. But under the unsafe building code, the provisions will effectively allow a determination that a building is considered to be unsafe. If a building is unsafe, it can be placarded if it is found to be an emergency situation. And the placard is simply going to be, this building is unsafe and its use or occupancy has been prohibited by the building inspector or by the code enforcement officer. That's all the placard has to say. I've discussed this with Lynn Brooks Avni, and those are the placards that in fact will be printed, and those are the placards that will be going up. I just want to distinguish that placard from the placards that are required in a fire situation. Those are different types of placards. We'll deal with those at a different time in terms of what they have to say. They have much different language, and those are more specifically in the case of vacant buildings to warn firefighters if they're going into a building that there may be areas that have not been checked out and they should be aware of where they have to go. And it actually gives them specific directions as to where they should go in a building. That's not the type of placarding I'm talking about. We're also looking to revise Chapter 114, which deals with electrical standards. Back in 2015, this board approved changes to the plumbing code, which is Chapter 201, specifically removing those provisions that dealt with licensing of plumbers by the village. Similarly, we would propose that the licensing provisions with regard to electricians by the village be removed, because that is now the responsibility of the County of Westchester. So anything that relates to licensing is not handled by the village, and all the codes and all the fees required for such licensing would be deleted from our fee book with regard to that. The most significant changes that we're going to propose will be to Chapter 162, which is the Housing and Property Maintenance Code of the Village of Ossining. And most specifically, what we would propose is revision to Article 6, which would now be considered administration and enforcement. This is where 1203.3 will come in. And briefly, for the board and for the members of the public, 1203.3 is a regulation promulgated by the state of New York pursuant to the executive law, and every municipality must meet 1203. We can exceed 1203, and I just want to be clear on something. There's a difference between enforcement and administration and code requirements. For purposes of Section 1203, which I'll go into, which is enforcement and administration, if the board decides it wants to be more strict than what is in 1203, they are free to do so. For example, the 1203 calls for triennial fire inspections of certain buildings and annual fire inspections of others. If the board deemed it appropriate to do those fire inspections, all of them annually, that's fine, as long as you would have the manpower and the ability to do that. That needs to be contrasted with the code in terms of what you need to build your house, what you need for plumbing. In those circumstances, the municipality may not have a more stringent standard unless the state has so approved it. The best example is in the case of Ossining in 1990. Ossining proposed a sprinkler law which at that time was more stringent than the state's. One of the things that I have asked the building department to look into is to determine whether the sprinkler statute as currently promulgated in, I believe it is Chapter 162, is in fact now more restrictive, equal to or less restrictive than the current state sprinkler code. Because back in 1990, the state didn't have its own sprinkler code. The state does now because it's adopted the international codes. And so that's something that has to be determined. So I just want it to be clear that if we are looking at a code section, that's something that would require approval from the state to be more stringent. In terms of enforcement and administration, we can effectively be as stringent as we want to be. There's no restriction on that. We just can't go below the floor that the state has set. But with regard to administration and enforcement, effectively, the key points to note here are that building permits, according to the state, are not required for every type of construction that is done. And one of the things that I've asked the building department to advise is the state provides a list of 12 different types of construction for which building permits are not required. The building department can make a determination that they want to follow all of those, none of them, or some of them. I know, for example, that I believe we do not require permits for installation of swimming pools that are less than 24 inches in depth and are installed entirely above ground, kiddie pools, for example. And that's listed here. But there's a whole list of things in here. And that's something I'm working with the building department to make sure that we're consistent with them. Same with regard to time limits or the number of plans that have to come out. But the most important changes that we will be seeing here relate particularly with regard to two areas I want to go into, and the first are operating permits. In our schedule of fees, we do have a fee for operating permits. We need a specific ordinance that relates to operating permits. And according to 12033, an operating permit is required, and it's required for the following types of buildings. Buildings that manufacture, store, or handle hazardous material in excess of certain quantities. Buildings that where hazardous processes and activities, including but not limited to commercial and industrial operations which produce combustible dust, are located. Buildings that maintain pyrotechnic devices. Buildings with one or more areas of public assembly with an occupant load of 100 persons or more, which is probably the most likely to apply within the village. And there are other buildings if the village so deems it appropriate. But these operating permits are mandatory. And the way that the 1203 is written is that these particular venues will have to be inspected before the operating permit can be issued. This would apply to houses of worship if they're over 100. And again, the 100-person occupancy is what the state's minimum is. If you wanted to go make it 50, you could do that. That would be a determination to be made by the board. But there will have to be an operating permit application that will have to be developed, and we'll do that in conjunction with the building department so that we can put that together. The state recommends that these operating permits either exceed 1 year, well, be at a minimum of 1 year, not to exceed 3 years. And the question will be, will it require multiple inspections each time that the operating permit has to get renewed? That would be a determination that the board could make. But the operating permits have to come in. I don't have the fee schedule in front of me, but as I said, there is a fee that is associated with operating permits. I have asked the building department to provide a rough approximation of how many venues we are talking about that would actually be subject to operating permits. We counted a few off in our heads, but that would be exceedingly rough. So I think it's important that we figure that out. It does not include schools, okay, because schools are not subject to 12033. So we are looking, however, it would be houses of worship or other locations, perhaps some of the restaurants that we're talking about here, anything would require the operating permit. So we will, that will go into 1203. The next significant issue will be fire safety and property maintenance inspections. We do have in our code currently Chapter 133, which are fire hazard inspections. The fire hazard inspection section is different than the fire safety inspection we're talking here, because the fire hazard inspection is a circumstance where the chief, deputy chief, assistant chief sees something. He can report it to the building department, and they can then conduct an inspection, or the building department can do it itself. It's not a regularly scheduled inspection. These fire safety inspections, however, under 12033 are required. They're mandatory. And how often they occur, at a minimum, for structures which contain an area of public assembly, and that's not with a limit of the number of people, that inspection must be performed once every 12 months. For buildings or structures being occupied as dormitories, which I don't think we have too many here, although we would have to check, again, once every 12 months. For all other multiple dwellings or non-residential buildings and structures, they should be performed not to exceed every 36 months. This is one of those areas where I mentioned that if the board believes it appropriate to have those inspections conducted more frequently, they can be. The key is the ability to get those inspections conducted. You don't want to put in a number and then not be able to actually do the inspections. But these fire inspections will be undertaken. One of the things that Planning Director Avni has been looking at is, in fact, how to schedule these fire inspections over a 3-year period. We've actually gone out to 2019 to see how to do it, how often they can be done, and I'll invite Lynn up so she may be able to just help us out. I think the calculation was anywhere between 6 and 7 a week they may be able to do in terms of manpower and things like that, but I'll let Lynn help out with that. But the fire safety and property maintenance inspections are important. It also should be noted that this is not the only type of inspection that is provided for under 12033. It's pointed out that inspections can be performed if the owner of the property wants an inspection. I actually had someone come in yesterday who is in what appears to be a lawsuit regarding his estate, or his father's estate, over 3 properties that are in the village of Ossining, to which he has not been permitted access and which he believes may well be in violation of the code. Even under our current code, he can do this, and I said, just go to the building department and request an inspection, and he'll go in and see what's going on. But those inspections are permitted, and it's important then that the fire safety inspections are there, and we will have those, within our code. 12033 also has sections that relate to complaints, record keeping, but most importantly, it also deals with a section on violations. Based upon court decisions, including a decision from the Justice Court here, the state revised its code procedure and its rules, and came up with Rule 1203.5, if I remember correctly, requiring that these violations must be cured within 30 days. And that is now specific within 12033. You have to have the 30 days. And what our violation can say is that it must be done within 30 days, and we can give you a court date if it's not done within 30 days, and prove to us that, in fact, your place has been taken care of. One of the things we propose is the current Housing and Property Maintenance Code has a reinspection provision, and which basically says that before we can proceed with a violation, the building must be reinspected. The proposal here is to put the onus on the entity that has gotten the violation. We're going to give you 30 days to get it done. If it's not done in 30 days, you're going to show up in court. If you fixed it, show us that you fixed it, rather than we have to go out and specifically assert that we have, in fact, re-inspected. We've had situations where we've gone back multiple occasions. Courts haven't viewed that as re-inspection, so this way, that is not there. I should point out that there is no re-inspection requirement specifically delineated in 12033. So it's not as if we're running contrary to 12033. One of the things that we will also include and can include in our violations is that the work must be started immediately, even though we'll give you 30 days to complete it. It's not as if we're going to let you wait till the 29th day to start your work, so that we can get this situation done. I do want to turn for a second to the issue of due process, because this becomes very important, and it's an issue that has been written up in a number of journals and it's come in a number of decisions. And the question is, what does someone do if they get a violation? And currently, or under the state system, there are regional boards of review. And if a party has a problem with a violation, they can essentially appeal to these regional boards of review, and there is a board of review for the Hudson Valley. That board meets every other month. It is probably anywhere from 6 to 8 months from the time you file an appeal till you get a decision. So it's a very time-consuming process because of the number of appeals. I think there's only 3 or 4 people on the board of review, and it just takes a very long time. Our current code, in fact, has, if you want to call it a workaround, but something that we can do. And what it essentially is it's a Housing Code Board of Appeals, which we have under Section 16253. It is a 3-member board. Members appointed by the village manager. They serve 2-year terms. And they are, based upon their knowledge, but they would be in a position to make a determination as to whether a violation was properly issued, whether a building was properly placarded. And they can uphold the determination of the code enforcement officer. They can modify it. They can reject it. And I think one of the things that this would permit is a fast resolution of what would otherwise be a very long and drawn-out process, and it does provide for due process. There was recently a court decision from the Supreme Court up in Tompkins County, which is where Ithaca is, where a public nuisance, where a building nuisance statute was ruled unconstitutional because while it provided for a hearing, it didn't describe what the hearing was. And the judge said, I have no way to know, so I'm not going to say that there's any due process here. This would provide for a hearing. It would basically say that within a week they have to notify the building inspector or the code enforcement officer that they want to have an appeal. It would be sent to the Housing Board of Appeals. They would make a determination. We wouldn't call it Housing Board of Appeals. We'll call it something else. And they would make a decision, let's say, within 7 days to 2 weeks, and they would make that decision. If the Housing Board wanted to, they could stay the enforcement of a particular violation until they issued their decision on the appeal. They could also decide not to. The international code mandates that there be a stay. The state has not adopted that part of the code, so we are not so obligated to do that. There is a third alternative in terms of how to deal with this, and the third alternative is to throw it back to the Board of Trustees, and that is that if a person has an issue with regard to a violation, they can advise the village clerk, and the village clerk can send it to the Board of Trustees. The Board of Trustees can conduct a hearing and decide if they want to do that. Not recommending any of the three, but I think that the Board of Appeals is probably the best way to go. I will say this, that the few jurisdictions that use the boards of review tend to be very small municipalities way upstate. The village of Carthage, and I'm not exactly sure what county that is in, but it is in a county that we probably don't go to too often. And the village of Clyde, another one, which is, I believe, in Jefferson County of all places. So those two, but most do not have that. Most have an appeal process by a type of housing board that we're talking about. Further, the board that we have also permits for advisory opinions. If they think that it is necessary to advise on changes in the code, they can so do so. And that board can certainly be reconstituted, I think, fairly quickly if we put information out on the website once the legislation is passed, and we can have that there. It also could be used in the event that there is placarding on an unsafe building, and if the person thinks it is not unsafe, they can act accordingly. And that's where a lot of those sections are. A couple of other things in terms of going through the ordinances and things I just want to discuss that I think have places within this. In Wappingers Falls, up in Dutchess, they have a couple of provisions which I think are of interest, may be of interest to the board, and they deal with the permitting and the certificate of occupancy requirements. In Wappingers Falls, for example, an application for a building permit will not be accepted unless there is proof that taxes, water and sewer bills, garbage bills, fines payable to the village justice court, and all other fees or fines due and payable to the village for the property are paid in full. So that would be a determination before they will even accept it. That's one of their elements in accepting a building permit, that everything has to be paid on the property. They also require there that except where an application is submitted for the purpose of curing existing violations or will result in the curing of existing violations, no application for a building permit shall be accepted, processed, or considered where there is an existing violation of any provision of the village code. And that's Wappingers. And they have an analogous section with regard to certificates of occupancy. Essentially, if you owe any money on anything relating to the property, taxes, we're not going to issue you, we're not going to give you C of O. And that's up there, and that was something that was amended and added there about 8 years ago, a little over 8 years ago, up there. Finally, there is a provision in our current code, 16239, I think, which relates to, oh goodness, it's heavy, which relates to, you should see the one I have in my office. And that one, 16239, actually is reinspection, 16233, which is called inspection before reoccupancy or reuse. This is something I've mentioned to the board before. This is a provision which, as it stands now, only refers to buildings within what's called the urban renewal zone of the village of Ossining. But it does provide that if a unit within that zone becomes empty, or if it is to be vacant, there is to be 30 days notice of that vacancy given to the building department so that they can then go in and conduct an inspection of that particular location. That does not mean that the unit cannot be rented during that period of time, but it is that the tenant has to be placed on notice that you're going into a unit that may not have been inspected, and you should be aware of that because we could come in and find that there are in fact defects in your particular unit. Whether the board wants to continue with that particular type of restriction is something that can be discussed, and it may be something for another day, but I did want the board to know that that particular section is in there. It's not directly part of 12033, but it's, again, one of the various sections are there. But we will be putting all of 12033 into what will be the new Article 6 of Chapter 162. So that will be administration and enforcement. It will give to the building inspectors and to the code enforcement officers the ability to go out, conduct the inspections. Lynn will talk more about the actual fire inspections and how they're going to be conducted, and hopefully who will be conducting them. But that's, in substance, the revisions that we have here. There are some definitional changes that I've mentioned before that we will be going through to try to have things that are consistent. One of the things that I have discussed with Lynn and with the other folks at the building department is that we need to review particularly our zoning code to make sure that requirements in the zoning code meet the state code, that they are not less restrictive than the state code, because as I pointed out before, if it's less restrictive, it's no longer applicable. So that's an ongoing process to make sure that gets done, so that we can at least get to the minimum with regard to certain state code requirements. In terms, there's a whole slew of things in terms of all the various codes. But for enforcement and administration, this will provide the fire inspections that will now be mandatory on the triennial or annual basis. They'll provide for the operating permits for those other buildings, and that's where we are.
Well, I'm sure everybody has a list. You seem to sit forward quickly. Lynn.
No,
Go
it's-
ahead.
Would you like to let Lynn
Yeah,
append,
Lynn has
and then
been-
we'll go from there?
Please.
Yeah.
Stuart has covered it so thoroughly, so I'll just go back to the fire inspections. So I think some of you already heard this, but on the triennial inspections, we have a list. We're currently trying to coordinate our list with the assessor's list of the properties that would be affected. Generally, it's 3 families or more. Bear in mind that the way things are classified, the assessor classifies 1 singles, 2s, and 3 families, and then once you hit 4 family or more, it's just classified as a 411. So if you could be a 4 family under a 411, or you could be a 12-unit building. So just bear in mind, so when you say that there's like, say, 250 411s, there could be a lot more units than there actually are numbers of properties are classified. But we've actually mapped out each of those units, each of those properties that would be affected, and tried to fit them into a triennial schedule, and have come out with an estimate of about 6 to 7 inspections in a given week that could happen.
Of properties, not of units.
Properties, yes. You are correct. Thank you.
Make sure I'm following.
Yes. And then that also incorporates not just the residential, the 3 family or more, but 1 or 2 of the annual inspections, which would be public assembly uses, commercial uses, certain commercial uses, and that sort of inspection. Currently, the village building department does conduct fire inspections pursuant to some of the licensing requirements that the village has for restaurants, coin ops, and cabarets. So that would sort of be an addition to it. I'm going to leave it there. Any other questions, and we can address them?
We definitely have some questions. So who wants to go first?
I'm not going to go first. I'm trying to do some math first, so.
Okay.
I go.
Oh, Manny, you never want to go first.
No. Shit. Thank you, Stuart. Thank you, Lynn. And just so people don't think that I was being disrespectful to what Stuart was talking about, I used my tablet to actually look up stuff while he was talking about, and I went to the Division of Code Enforcement of New York State, which the Village of Ossining and the Town of Ossining are listed there for the restrictions or how restricted they are in regards to the sprinkler system. And our municipality did this in 1991, and actually the latest one in regards to the sprinkler was Harrison, which they did in 2006. So, and then there's a bunch of other stuff in there where it relates to housing, it relates to fire protection, building and plumbing, C of O's actually, there's demolitions and vacancies and repairs. So I think that hopefully will cover what 1203. Part of what I've always have said before, and which is great, that we actually going to be able to accommodate all this additional information and all these clarifications on our laws for 1203. And something that you mentioned, Stuart, that New York State does have on their building code, you know, what requires a building permit, what does not require a building permit. And that was actually, if you kind of go back, Lynn, I did give a presentation that was done a couple years back, and actually lists all that information in there. And if we can update our website for people, residents, and, you know, architects and engineers that want to do any work, to be able to actually see if they require a building permit or not, if they require, you know, architectural drawing, sign, and seal, because there is a minimum standard for that as well, which is, I believe, $20,000 worth of work. After that, you require, if it's less, you don't require sign and seal stamp drawings, but after that you do. And there's a couple other provisions that require architectural or engineering work as well. So I would like all that information that is there to be in our website, because that's a lot of, it has led to a lot of confusion with a lot of people out there, that if you want to replace a window, you can because you need a building permit. If you want to add a railing, you can, one of 2 steps or 3 steps, you can because you need a building permit, because now becomes a structural. So I think some of that maintenance that we need to do, or clarifications that we need to do on our end to clarify that to the public, I think is going to be essential for us to do. So with all these changes, just keep that in mind. And when you were talking about looking at your book, I was looking at that our line 360, and I guess we do need to update some of the sections because they're not correlated the same, so I was a little confused. So
Right. And the general code folks, I spoke to them this week. If we send our code volumes up to Rochester, once a year, they will basically go through them, make sure they're all up to date, and send them back to us, you know, in correct order. So we're going to do that very quickly.
so that's what I got so far.
Next. Okay.
Go for it.
Now, I was just doing the math on, if you're doing 6 to 7 buildings, I actually thought it was units first, so it's buildings, so even some of the larger buildings for the inspection,
Well,
so.
yeah, that would.
So,
break down
see, I
even
don't, the
more.
math doesn't work out, to do 6 or 7, I mean, you know, you'd complete 1,092 in the 3-year period, then you have to start again. I don't actually think that adds up to the total that you have to do. So I understand it's based on current availability, and I'm sure you looked at, you know, how many man hours I mean, the average American works 250 days a year, not 365, right? So you have to, like, I do the math, and I think we need to revisit the math when you're done mapping on your wall, which I know is what you're doing, but it's important because this doesn't even add up, and we're just going to need to be clearer. So that was just a comment, but it's a Herculean feat, long overdue. Glad you're doing it. We may need to add a person or two, and it's like everything else. If we want it done quicker and more, then it's all about people power and how that gets done. So thanks for doing it, but I think it's going to require more. Stuart, the information you just did, I felt like saying amen at the end because it's terrific, and I'm glad you're going to be doing it on a regular basis. From a communications point, do you need more chairs? No. From a communication point of view, if there's any way to take part of this video and actually put it on your part of the site, because when people read the stuff that we look at, what's going to come down the pike, not exciting reading, but hearing what you're talking to, all the stuff's basically online. I think it'll be, from a communication point of view, helpful for people. Stuff about, you know, whether we do permits going forward for electricians. I know that's a huge complaint, on all sorts of levels. You sort of went through that, not so quickly, but there's a lot of stuff, a lot of golden nuggets in what you said. I don't know if there's a way to do it, but maybe Jamie and Paul can look at it. As you go through your ongoing conversation, I would really appreciate that. So there's just a lot in there. I don't want to go through all the points because you're going to bring it up. I'm just concerned, Paul, about straight line math and what we might realistically need. And I don't want it to look like we're over budget. I want it to look like this is what it takes if you want to accomplish X to Y. And let's say what we need in order to accomplish this, because people have been talking about this for years, and it's a big topic.
Agreed, understood, and to remind the board and the public, we presently have a vacancy in there for
Yeah.
the inspector role right now, but we all discussed internally, we do not want to hire anybody new until we really get our logistics in shape.
That's it for me.
Stuart, that was magnificent. I would, if there's such a thing, to talk about that. No, I can really appreciate your articulation of all the different elements of the code. I think that there's a couple things going on here. One is sort of this reconciliation or sort of analysis of our current land use code versus state requirements, which I kind of see as something separate from the promulgation of the other codes that have to do with enforcement. So I guess I would want to get a better understanding of that process, how long it's going to take to do that. You know, if our current code is not in compliance with state regulations or state land use code, you know, what that's going to be about. It sounds like we're going to be doing a pretty, this is going to be a pretty major piece of legislation, so, because we're going to adopt all this stuff, right? I mean, that's the idea. We're going to adopt, we have to go through a legislative process to adopt it into our code, or does it just sit on, it just sits on top of us now?
No, you need to, it would have to be a formal, you know, adoption, so it'd be public hearing and everything like that. It's not simply because it's 1203, you got to follow.
Right.
We would, you know, you would adopt it.
So I guess would the strategy be to, would there be a certain order to do different sections, or would you recommend doing the whole thing? How do you, what's the roadmap?
Let me, John, if I can answer the first part, which
Okay,
is
sure.
related to the other sections of the code. Lynn and I have talked about this a bit, but that is of that's of great importance, because what we cannot have are provisions of the code which are in fact less restrictive than the state's. I had a very lengthy conversation with a senior attorney at the Department of State a couple of weeks ago who was very helpful, but part of that was that when she, she said, "Oh, I've been looking at the Village of Ossing's code," and I said,
Okay.
I said, "Okay, thanks." So it will be important that we get those sections down quickly, because obviously it's important from a planning perspective, it's very important from a zoning perspective, and it's important for our code enforcement folks who go out there, because effectively we have been and we need to use the state code, but in terms of if someone is coming in, and Lynn may be able to talk better to this, coming with a set of plans which is based upon, let's say, what we have in Chapter 270, but the state says this, we want to make sure we're where they are. That's why I brought up the issue of the sprinkler system, because back in 1990, what we put in was essentially state-of-the-art in terms of that, and we just want to make sure we are where we need to be with regard to that. In terms of the second area of your question, what the proposal is that the legislation would, right now, would involve the minor amendment to Chapter 91 to make reference to the Energy Code, amendment to Chapter 95 to include it as the unsafe building and demolition, removal of the licensing standards for electrical under Chapter 114, and then the significant amendment to Chapter 162, which would put in the enforcement and administration section, the new chapter, the new Article 6. That would be this time around. It will still be a work in progress, because I'm sure that as we go through, we will find definitions of certain things that have to be changed and things that have to be revised. But that's overall, I think, the first thing to do, because of critical importance, is to get 1203 out there and get those inspections started as quickly as we can. And to go to something that Trustee Levin was mentioning, I think it's very important. For example, with regard to operating permits, these are brand-new inspections that are going to start. So the limited number of venues that are under that need to know what that is. There may have to be a phase-in time, so that because they're going to have to do a permitting process, and we're going to have our people go out and do those inspections. So there will have to certainly be an outreach to those folks to make them aware of the fact that this is what's coming. Same with the fire inspections, you know, regardless of who's in the first, you know, one-third, you know, triennial or whatever. But to get 1203 and these other, you know, amendments in there. I mean, the electrical, I think, is fairly straightforward. We just take out the licensing requirements because we don't license anymore. But getting the 1203 is particularly important so that we can get that in there. And also, to be blunt, so that when new violations are written, they're written in accord with this. And so therefore, if an action is brought ultimately in justice court, we're working under 1203 and under these new requirements.
So do you, I mean, you've laid out a lot here. I mean, do you have a timeline? Do you have a,
The plan, hopefully, and that's my plan, is to, as to what I've discussed tonight, to call for a public hearing, to have the resolution to call for a public hearing next Wednesday, which would be the 1st, the public hearing to be on the 15th, and then the first Wednesday in April would be the legislative session to pass the legislation. So that's the timeline. So the resolution next week would be for the public hearing, and then it would simply follow from there. And it will be available for the public to look at so that everyone will see where the changes are. It will reference the other sections of the code so that they can go back and forth and see what those changes are. But that's the plan rollout.
But that scenario is for the Uniform State Code, right?
That would be for the Uniform State Code, the minor revision to Chapter 91, the unsafe building, and the electrical. So that would be those 1, 2, 3, 4 sections. So those 4 areas would be contained within this. Correct.
Okay. And the land use element of it.
That's something I have to sit down with Lynn to go over that.
Okay.
I think what's needed there, and it's something I think we have to talk to our state rep on. If our code is in some ways less restrictive than the state, it may be that all we need to do is just basically insert the state code. It may not require a new ordinance because the state code's there. Also, I should point out, if our code is more restrictive than the state, we're going to have to ask the state for permission to use the more restrictive code. And the way it works is you're permitted to use the more restrictive code unless the state says no. So that's something we would have to look at. But the key, I don't think that it would require a legislative change if we were less restrictive, because we're simply then, by Chapter 91 and by 162, the new Article 6, we'll be adopting the full state code. So we'll be adopting every section of the state code.
Question, Lynn. So you've already mapped out how many inspections you think you can do per week. That's like 6 per week.
Yes.
So that's 6 properties?
Yes.
Okay. And so just for the sake of a question, what actually entails a fire inspection? Like, what are you looking for?
So if it were 3-family residence, we're looking at the common hallways, the egress, the panic hardware, the fire safety.
Like sprinklers and all those?
If it's required, yes.
Okay.
Depending on when it was constructed, yes.
Okay. So that's like 6 per week, though. So, yeah.
That's what I asked.
Yeah.
Based on their current
Current manpower. Okay.
Right.
So that's basically like if it's an apartment building, that's one person for that day.
Right, it depends.
Okay.
So right now, we've mapped, the larger apartment buildings are not on the earlier side of
Gotcha.
it, but that would come down differently.
I have one follow-up that wasn't, you went into the Board of Appeals
Yes.
discussion. That's not part of one of the sections of the legislation, that's something you're bringing.
Right.
That's a separate conversation, or is that a part, how does that fit into a timeline? We don't have one today. Is that just like we create other boards, and the
plan-
village manager appoints, I heard that part, but
Right.
it's,
Under,
does that have to wait for the rest of the stuff?
No,
Is it like a parallel path?
no,
Do we have
I-
to decide about it separately?
what I would like, what I think would be preferable is to make it part of what we're doing here. Because that way, if a violation is issued, the person can know that they can go to this board. Now, it's gonna require that we get the board up and running fairly,
Yes.
quickly. Sort of the same way that we got, people who are involved with the others, that we have now. But, there are, as I said, in our code now, we have a provision for that, what we call, a Housing Code Board of Appeals.
What section was that,
When's the
Stuart?
last time we had one?
We have, trustee Kazad, sections 16252 to 16254. And it's a three-member board appointed by the village manager, each for terms of 2 years. It can have its own procedures.
So it's already, so the skeleton is already in there?
Yes, that is correct. That is correct.
All right,
Well,
something else to think about.
Well, my only question would be is if we haven't constituted that board yet, and somebody wants to make an appeal, where's the due process?
You raise a fair point. At
I
this
mean, I don't expect you to have an answer, but I mean, if this exists in our code, I mean, this is the first I'm hearing of it, so,
It is-
I confess I've not read that book.
Okay.
In its entirety, so, yeah, well, apparently, but,
That's great for a filibuster.
yeah. But, no, at the end of the day, we've got something in the code, and if somebody wanted to appeal, would they come before the Board of Trustees in a pinch? I mean, it says that,
It actually does not provide for that. It simply says, any person, owner, corporation who feels they're aggrieved with the ruling or decision of the enforcing officer may appeal the decision or interpretation to the Housing Code Board of Appeals. I mean, that's what it says. So it doesn't have a default that it would go to you folks. Since this is in the code and has been in the code for a while, it may well be that one of the things the board may want to consider is just getting people on that board now, and doing that. But I think certainly, particularly given the due process as relates to building code violations and placarding and entering buildings, is a very big issue with a lot of courts. It's important that we have it, spelled out, and that it be there. Yeah, as I said, as Trustee Levin said, the skeleton's here, so we can do that. I think the point is well taken in terms of where we currently, but there is a right of appeal here, and this way we'll also make sure that the people are aware of it, that if they have that issue, they can do that, because hopefully it will resolve a lot of issues before they have to go any further.
well, I mean, I guess my concern is, I mean, we're gonna have to constitute a board here, so, I mean, in the absence of that board, do they have to go to this state?
If they, currently, if they have an appeal, they would go to the State Board of, Regional Board of Review. That's what.
Takes 7 months to get
Which
processed.
yeah, can take, easily 6 to 8 months, correct. But that would be, if you want to call it, for want of a better term, the default process of doing it. And I think just because
I
everyone.
guess I'm
would-
just saying, in the absence of the constitution of this board, I would hate to have a violation like that have to wait for 7 months to be adjudicated. I just think that's, is there any way, is there any interim situation in which at least the Board of Trustees could hear these things at least until we're able to constitute the board?
I will look into that.
I wouldn't want.
Let's
to do that.
constitute the board.
Yeah, I
Well,
wouldn't.
I'm just saying that, you know, having a violation going on for 7 months, I
Okay,
mean.
but the
I'm
thing
just-
is, what okay, so, let me just, I'm gonna comment on that and we can wrap it up. We've been talking about this for a while and I still have a list of things to get through. So can I just give my thoughts as part of my comments here? So I wanna just say, Paul, thank you for opening up this discussion by sharing that report from the code enforcement officer. Obviously, we are aware of some of the very dangerous situations that our frontline workers, staff are facing, and I think it's important that other folks know what's really going on and why we're spending so much time working to clean up and strengthen and align our codes to ensure the safety of the folks in our community. And on that note, I want to say, Stuart, it's less than 2 months that you've been here, and thank you. You've shown an incredible dedication. Your approach is extremely thorough and collaborative with the other departments, in this case really focusing on the life safety issues that are facing us in the community. So I have a couple more things on my list, and then I'm going to look forward to next week's call for a public hearing, and I know we'll have more opportunities every time these topics come up to revisit and ask more questions that we have arise over the coming weeks. I'll pick up on the appeals board question. Maybe you know, because you've got the thing open in front of you, but the way that it's written, are there any qualifications required, residency required, any recommendation of the skill set of the people? Are we hoping there's at least one lawyer? Do we care if they know anything about real estate or construction, or is it just they need to live in the village? It'd be nice if they knew where the village was, you know. Usually there's a residency requirement for something like this. So while we're figuring that out, I'll just...
It doesn't have any of that.
Okay. So then I would just say, there is a due process. The system is in place. There's a court system.
Right.
But what this could do, if it were constituted, is it could streamline what actually gets to the courts. Because the point of the appeals board would be if a property owner says, this violation is inappropriate, I don't think I should even be held to this, then the appeals board would review it. But correct me if I'm wrong, if my misunderstanding is inaccurate. The appeals board could look at it and say, hey, you know what, you're right. This violation is not warranted, either the way it's written or what it is. And then our staff and the courts don't have to deal with it. So we've just taken something out of the stream.
Right.
Hopefully not something that's a life safety issue, but that we'll be able to revisit in a way that's really going to succeed at getting the compliance that is necessary. So I would look for us to be able to constitute it as quickly as possible, because I think it could actually be helpful for us to streamline this process. You said that schools are exempt from inspections. Is that just public schools or is that all schools? Do you know?
I believe it's just public, but I think it goes through DASNY.
Okay. And it was interesting, it seemed like there were just a couple of communities that had, they would not issue building permits or certificates of occupancy if the property had any outstanding fees or taxes.
Wappingers Falls.
So that's the only one?
There are others, but
There are others. That was one of the model
They
legislations. Okay.
explicitly put that into their enforcement and administration under building codes. I've come across a couple that have done that, but they have it most explicitly in theirs with regard to both.
It sounds like a great idea, but I would be interested to know what the unintended consequences might be, and if we're looking to legislate something that is really a problem, or if we're just legislating something because it sounds really good, because that way we make sure the village gets paid.
Again, it's not required under 12033, so it can always be something that we can talk about and then put into at another time.
Okay.
But it's something that's in a particular code in a fairly close jurisdiction.
And Mayor, before you go down your list, and Stuart can correct me, but I just leaned over to ask him, the more prevalent benefit of the
Appeals board?
the appeals board, thank you, isn't finding something that shouldn't be going to the court because it has no merit. It's they can actually process and come to resolution and settlement and keep it out of the court, which is going to be
Love it.
a much more efficient way, I think, to
Excellent.
One of the things we learned with the other board is when you have that in place, like the landlord
Gotta
tenant,
turn your mic on.
Well, one of the things we learned, that Quantan and I looked at when we're looking at landlord-tenant, is that when you have that in place, the court system, having that in place, actually prefers that citizens use that and therefore give it more credence, gravitas, whatever you want to call it. So it's got some real nice benefits to it, as we've learned from another project that we're working on.
So if the choice was the regional 6 to 8 months option, constituting a local board, or making us listen to it, I go with choice B. And I think that's that's what you did not recommend but recommended. Then my last question, and maybe this is one of the things that I just haven't assigned it to its name, but when you referenced the vacancy notice, the 30-day notice that when there is a vacancy that allows for an inspection, I don't know if it requires an inspection or allows for an inspection, but it seemed like because, were you suggesting that the way that is written, it's referencing the economic renewal zone, urban renewal zone?
Yes.
Were you suggesting that that be expanded to the entire village?
The thought would be that you would delete the urban renewal language and expand it rather than keep the,
To what?
keep the specific.
For the whole village?
It could be the entire village. It could be any multiple or anything that
Are
comes
we
within the-
required to inspect every vacant apartment within 30 days of its, if we're notified within 30 days, are we then required to inspect each one? Because that seems like a great idea to have the ability to, but I don't know how we would, be able to hold landlords accountable for the
Right.
notification within 30 days, and that if they don't, then what? And if we're requiring our building department to inspect everyone, although I really like the idea, I'm just wondering if that's feasible, and I don't like to pass laws that I know we can't enforce.
Well, and that's something to look at. It is a section, again, at this point, it was referring specifically to the area encompassed by the Ossining Urban Renewal Agency, and it does provide that the same shall, meaning the unit, shall not be reoccupied and reused for residential purposes unless an inspection made under the provision of this chapter at a date not more than 30 days prior to the dwelling unit so becoming vacant. So what you'd need is you'd need your landlord saying that it's becoming vacant, then you'd have to have someone actually go out and conduct the inspection. But it's interesting, what it also has there is that it provides that prior to the time when a dwelling unit subject to the provision of this section is to become occupied, the tenant is to be provided with a document in a 12-point type saying that the dwelling which you are about to occupy is subject to the provisions of the Housing Code of the Village of Ossining and may not lawfully be occupied unless it has been found free of violations of the code. If it is occupied in violation of the code, the tenant may be subject to removal. Records relating to the dwelling unit may be examined at the building department of the Village of Ossining. So, in other words, it doesn't mean the landlord couldn't rent it, means it, but it does impose, it does call for an inspection. And so it may be something that the board wants to consider, is while it sounds good, first of all, how do we get the compliance from the landlords? And number two, once we get the compliance, are we going to be able to basically get someone in there? Lynn and I were talking earlier
Well, there's
today.
a third piece. Somebody's moved in. How do you get rid of that poor person who doesn't,
Well, that's
who's
that's
now
true.
living there
That's true.
for 30 days or whatever?
And one of the things that Lynn and I were talking about is what if a unit basically becomes vacant 4 or 5 times in a year? I mean, you just, you're gonna keep potentially going back to a unit to see what's going on. How many inspections? There may have been a very specific reason why this was passed with regard to the urban renewal zone. I have seen this particular type of language in other municipalities that does not limit its restriction. But again, that's something for the board's consideration as to whether it's something that needs at this point to remain in 162 in Chapter 162. At this point, it's there now, but clearly, since we're not using the urban renewal zone, it's sort of there without any impact.
Great. I think we have a couple of quick ones, right?
No, it's great. We are on schedule. What do you mean?
And my mic
5
wasn't
minutes
on.
We're
so-
25 minutes behind.
Okay.
Ahead of schedule, that was a big one.
Next on the agenda are 2 rather quick items. The first is, Lynn's going to discuss, if she wants to come back to the podium, the cabaret license for 3 Westerly Bar and Grill. Before as she's approaching the microphone, I will tell you that I did speak with Acting Chief Lieutenant Giorgio today. This is a little different. The police can't really give you a historical recap because it's new. I think everybody knows what we're discussing here. It's the new restaurant appended to Harbor Square, 3 Westerly Bar and Grill. I think we're all pretty excited that that's opening up. And he did want me to confirm to you all that they're aware of it opening up, and they're going to increase their police presence down there accordingly and monitor that in addition to what they do down there already. So that's what they had to offer with regard to the cabaret license. Lynn?
So from the building department's perspective, they passed a fire inspection on the 16th of this month, and they have a partial CO on it, and they're ready to become operational. That's our what?
I'm sorry.
And that is the
Did you bring the menu to us?
I came on. I didn't know
Good
what was
opportunity
what was up against. So yeah, I'm here.
Welcome.
Welcome. How are you?
Can you just give us your name?
Oh, Jeremy Casilli.
You ready?
I didn't hear. Yeah, is there a question?
No, I don't know.
Oh,
I think
looking
we were
at me
trying
like
to
I had
figure out
an
who you were.
You're coming here to say something, so we're trying to give you
I
the
was going to bring the
opportunity.
chef here for a tasting menu, but I figured
Well,
that'd be a
good.
little
That would have been a
tough.
good idea.
Yeah, this is like your next consumer.
We're-
Why
we're-
didn't you?
We're
I should've.
pretty easy customers on this point, if everybody's okay with it. I know we heard from the police department that they were okay with it, because they don't
Okay.
have any history. We're hoping that they don't get a big history
Yeah.
next time it comes up.
Yeah, I mean, just so you know, nothing past 2 a.m. You'd be getting the same hours that all the other cabaret licenses have in the village.
Okay.
So as long as you're okay with
Yeah.
that late hour,
Yeah.
or nothing past that, that would be our ask. So
Yeah. Anything after 2 a.m. and people start getting dizzy at that point anyway. So it's
fair enough.
understood.
Okay. I have no objection.
We're good
Okay, so that resolution will be on next week
next week?
for your consideration. And we'll go right to the 8:50 topic on the agenda.
Thank you.
Can I just make sure, are you open now? What are you waiting
No,
for?
April
When can I
3rd or
come
April
down?
10th will be the opening. Soft opening for 2 weeks.
I know somebody wants to do an event in April.
Ah. But it will be maybe the
But
3rd.
that's a little tight.
Get
Okay,
open in
okay. Thank you, sir.
time. Okay.
Looking
Thank
forward
you.
to it.
Nice
Gonna be a good
meeting you.
spring.
Okay. Again, the 8:50 topic is Treasurer Warren with a discussion with regard to standard workday and reporting resolution for elected and appointed officials. Tom.
Good evening again, and I didn't realize we had such interest in this topic tonight.
Got a good crowd for it.
And I hope that they won't be disappointed that I'm going to try to get you back on schedule with your 9:20, because I don't really feel that this really deserves a half-hour discussion. Basically, what it was the retirement system had sent a letter to the village reminding us that elected and appointed officials, certain appointed officials, need to have their time records updated and reviewed by the village board and approved by resolution, and then it gets posted on the bulletin board and gets submitted to the retirement system. And what it ends up doing is it's a factor in the payroll that we process where the time worked by the elected officials and the one appointed official, and the one appointed official is a deputy corporation counsel because he does have irregular work hours in that he works evenings and part-time in essence. So that's what the agenda item, the discussion is tonight. I did send to the board members all the time records that were submitted and tabulated the numbers. And the only one modification I'm going to make is that the resolution for next week's agenda, instead of just listing the current term of office for the elected and appointed officials, is going to include all the terms of office since it was last done. So the resolution is going to include some of you twice in the resolution for each of the 2-year terms that you hold.
Does it matter what my title is, because it says I'm a trustee? Which I was probably the first time you filled out this
Right,
paperwork.
the letter that came from the state, the last time that we went through this process in 2015, I believe you were a trustee.
Well, we went through it in 2014,
And so,
and I was a trustee. 2015, I was mayor.
right, okay. But the resolution that will be adopted by the board next week will show your mayor's title
Okay.
for purposes of this updated certification.
Okay.
Any questions?
Did everybody get the email with all the numbers? We're all good? That reflected what you had submitted? You feel comfortable with that?
Why is the color one?
Is there a reason, not everybody is on here. Some people are, some people are not.
My
One
name was
deputy.
not actually on.
No, the
it is.
first-
No,
first-
no,
no-
it's on there, but you sent another
Yeah,
email.
the first
My
attachment I wasn't
email
there
was
for.
not
The
on
New York
mine.
State form.
You're actually, you know, the way the state set up the form, they only included like 3 lines for elected officials on page 1. So page 2 has a lot more lines, and I listed the 2 of you on page 2. The reason why you're on page 2 and not page 1 was because I had to pick 3, and the state had specifically cited 3 elected officials from the last time that the certification was done.
They're the lucky ones.
So we should be looking at this and,
This is not a
This is you?
presentation that I have here.
what are we doing here? What's happening?
No, this is the next. This is
That's
the next
getting ready for the 920.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
I think people are assuming that you're just about done.
I think I'm
Do people have
done.
any more questions about the
just waiting
standard
for any
workday?
follow-up
Call you
questions.
separately.
No, we're good.
The hook
Sorry.
is on you.
No, we
you
can,
got it.
okay.
Thank you.
So,
hook's
we
coming
kind of got
out.
used to the hour and a half. We need to do a tape break that we used to have with the old system, and that time has come. So, when we get back in the room, we have one last item agenda, but it's a big one. So, there's been a request for a 5-minute recess. If you don't want to get out of your seat, you don't have to. It's only a 5-minute recess. I will also remind folks that it is a work session environment, and so that is an opportunity for us on the board to talk to our staff and to hear from our staff. We do have public comment sections twice a month. Last week, no one was there. I'm going to guess next week we might have a few visitors. But when we discuss the roundabout, which is obviously a topic of much discussion recently, we will be addressing many of the questions that have come to us. Some of them not for the first time, but we'll be expanding on some of that as well as getting some update and some new information on the project. So 5-minute recess, and then we'll get back to our last agenda item.
I can't see the summary.
Okay, everybody. We're going to get started. It's a big audience, and I'd appreciate in advance everybody's attention, and if we do need to have sidebar discussions, please feel free to go out in the hallway and have the same. We're going to cover a lot of material tonight. I will tell you in advance, the main reason this is on the agenda tonight is to give the board and the public an update on the secret process, which is running in parallel to the design process. If you haven't noticed, the design engineer consultant representing Mazer Engineering is not with us this evening. He's actually off this week. And at the level of design that we've reached to date, I think most of the questions that I want to read and discuss publicly really are not too technically laden. So I think if the board will permit me, I'd like to take the culmination of all the questions that have come in from the various channels into either the manager's office or through the board of trustees through other either email or social media or what have you, because we try to scan all of those venues to pull which really amounts to a lot of repetitive questions, but we've culminated them in a list, and I'm going to read through some of that, and then I'm going to go through some specific things that were not asked, but I think are good public information to put out at this point with regard to what we're doing in concert with the design. And then we have Joe Tremelli, who some of you may know as the consultant engineer and planning from the consultant engineering and planning firm Kellard Sessions. He's our planning consultant that helps the administration of the planning and zoning boards. He's also running, again, in a parallel track with the design, the secret process associated with this project. That's something that we discussed early on, although it strike two, Jackie. Okay. So we have, again, implemented and commenced with the secret process here when in the beginning discussions on what we were going to do with the intersection, whether it was going to be a conventional intersection or the roundabout that we're presently pursuing now, is we didn't necessarily think that the secret process was necessary, but after further consideration, particularly with the roundabout, some of the roundabout components, the board decided unanimously to implement that as well. So I'm going to drag Joe into the conversation a little later, but please, if you'll just, I did put the picture up there for you to glance at as I talk, but some of the questions really aren't pertaining to the picture, but when I do need to reference it, I will do so with my pointer. Okay, so one of the main questions is with regard to the budget on the roundabout. I'm going to start by saying that the $500,000 number that has been consistent from the first day the roundabout was really presented in concept fashion along when there was a side-by-side comparison made about a year ago with the conventional intersection. The $500,000 number was a rough estimate on the construction of the roundabout proper. It did not include soft costs, like the consulting services that we've billed to this capital project from the get-go, which really, if you want to track it as we're going to track it internally with Tom's office, I'm sorry, Tom, the treasurer's office, we'd like to show full cost of the project. So this capital line in our budgets reflects everything going all the way back to the implementation of the Spring Street two-way. And some of the consulting services from the comp plan and then the implementation of the Spring Street two-way, including the contractor painting, removal of spaces, et cetera. So that's all being tracked, and when everything's said and done with the intersection improvements, we will have a true project cost. But for the required bond, because the money that's been spent to date has been done with either a balance transfer or contingency transfer, but the required $500,000, which we anticipate coordinating a borrow through the treasurer's office, is still a comfortable estimate based on the concept to date for the roundabout. But as we get into the details of the design, when I'm going to go over the schedule a little bit later in my presentation. But as we get into the details of design, including specifications of construction, lighting, landscaping, and additional work contiguous to this project, including the redevelopment of the Market Square parking area, that of course is going to be at an additional cost. And like I think for those of you who have known me and you heard me make capital presentations, these are all engineer estimates. But in the public bidding sector, nothing is as succinct as an engineer's estimate. Public bidding is fickle. It depends on the time of year. It depends on the economy, and it depends on a lot of things. So sometimes it becomes very tough to know what the contractors are going to come in and submit as their public works bid. Public construction has components to it that typically drive up a price versus what you were going to do if you were an independent contractor and you're not subject to things like workman's comp or prevailing wages, or in some cases, and if the project's really grandiose, Wick's Law. But that's not the case here. So the $500,000 is still the number that you're going to see until the development of the design allows us to be more detailed. And we will, of course, make that information available as the project gets more refined. We're going to keep the public in the loop through the different social media venues and meetings that we have. So look out for that. And I'm sorry, I meant to preface everything I said by I must have had, in a good way, at least 15 conversations in my office, whether via email or sometimes texting, but more often than not, just regular old phone calls from folks who are calling in because they see all the attention it's getting. And I will be happy, as time permits, to have a conversation and ask any questions they have, and I'll continue to do that as we go through this process at either the manager's office at 941-3554 or 941-4660, which is the DPW offices. I'm bouncing between both places, so if you leave a message in either place, I will call you back, and I will try to answer any questions that you may have regarding the same. So again, getting back to the list that the board has put together to try to address some of the concerns. Is the bond just for construction? Yes, I think I addressed that already. Does this existing construction project include any placemaking enhancements like seating, landscaping, and artwork? Is the intersection construction simply creating an opportunity and foundation, or will there be a secondary process for determining some of these placemaking enhancements? And where are you with that? So I will tell you that either intersection improvement, whether it was originally the conventional and now the roundabout, both offered placemaking components. We really didn't start talking about the evaluation of the Market Street lot until we got into the fact that we were encroaching, and we were also talking about the logistics of contractor mobilization. So you are afforded a little more space with the roundabout option with the potential for placemaking. Now this is merely a first blush concept for landscaping, but I did want to put this up there because it shows the additional placemaking components that we'll be able to develop as we go further, including this additional green and brick space outside the corner of Brandreth and Main. There's areas over here that we hope to create as a to-be-determined use, but right now it just shows some landscaping between what is going to be a parking area buffer from the roundabout itself, and then there's still the contiguous sidewalk on either side, either side, either side. The only place where we don't think we'll have a landscape and brick and mortar detail, but won't be a real people place, is an additional buffer that's going to be created here, and a cutback in the area over here to permit some vehicle turning. I'm going to talk about the timeline in a bit, and the secret process is on the list. I'm going to allow Joe to get into that, but if it's okay, Joe, we'll wait till the end because I want to stay on some of the more generic stuff. One of the big things that came out of the questions to me and the board, and also the question that came out of our first meeting with the stakeholders, including HPC, Downtown Development Committee and the Chamber of Commerce was what are going to be the impacts on some of the larger downtown events like the Village Fair, the Portuguese Festival, and the Farmers Market. Each of those entities will have to make some adjustment with their operation, but we see no reason why all three of those events can't be successfully had this summer, even in the midst of construction. Some people might not be set up where they were set up exactly last year, but the village, as it's done every year historically with all three of those entities, will do everything it has to do to make sure they're successful. But just as a quick blush on some of the things we discussed, farmers market has, it's important that the farmers market is in this downtown area. I think that's agreed by the principals there. So right now we're considering moving the farmers market during the summer of construction into the post office parking lot, which actually offers a more enhanced venue than it may have last year, with the additional spaces paved over here and the different entry points that we have to the market area that were created adjacent to the sidewalk. So that's a good thing, and that's not set in stone, but once it is, we'll make everybody aware. And we're going to do what we have to do to coordinate with the Portuguese folks and the chamber folks with regard to their respective events. Another question, will people be able to drive through the intersection during construction? The engineer, when describing some maintenance and protection of traffic, and when I say maintenance and protection of traffic, I mean both pedestrian and vehicular traffic, there is no anticipated interruptions to the present operation of the intersection during construction of the roundabout. Most of the work is going to be taking place here, which is presently, if you could see some of the grayed out lines over here, which is the present sitting area Market Square. It's over here, which is a present parking area, so not really in the flow of traffic, and these areas over here. That's the majority of the excavation work. It's not until you get into this center island work where we're going to, we hope to run some utilities out there, at least electrical, maybe water. That's to be determined. It's not till you start doing this work in the actual center of the intersection where you might have some interruption, but we will always maintain with modest detours the intersection up until the point where we're ready to make the conversion to a roundabout. Same to be said for pedestrian crossing. I think obviously we're not going to maintain the pedestrian crossing where it is now once they start doing this work. I would envision, although it's not determined yet because that's still being developed, that the pedestrian crossing is going to be pulled away from the project the way the permanent pedestrian crossing is being pulled away from the intersection right now. But as that gets determined, I will of course relay all those components. How much parking will be lost during construction? I anticipate losing the majority of the present Market Square parking. But the benefit of that is it's also anticipated that if this is approved to be brought into the scope, that when the contractor, prior to pulling out, leaves this mobilization area, he recreates this parking lot, which will be an additional, laid out as shown here, an additional 8 spaces, which is a nice location to have the 8 spaces, because these 8, with the addition of the 14 that were created over here and on the street, will leave the project after completion with, my rough math is a net 15 space increase from where we stand today. The most notable spaces lost that I think were most discussed, because it's on really the commerce side of the street here, was in front of the deli, but we've agreed to have the water department include the moving of this fire hydrant here, which is taking up 2 spaces now, and moving this into the island area over here possibly, and take the two of the 4 spaces lost for the people place here and putting them right there in fairly close proximity, and then adding these 2 spaces over here, 2 of the 8 additional created in the new parking layout over here, right adjacent to the crosswalk, what takes you right into the Main Street Deli area. Same to be said for the space that's lost to create the radius, the turning radius in front of Vaza Salon. we created spaces over here, and we have a anticipated pedestrian crossing area to complement the one that we put in there now in the parking lot. So you have pedestrian right to that area where you're losing the spaces. Same thing to be said for over here. The spaces that will be lost during construction are going to be turned into 8 additional spaces with the construction of that parking lot. So I think that's a good component to allowing the parking lot to be added. And that's actually part of the reason, and I could actually speak to some of the stakeholders here now that are wondering why. I know we're going to shoot for this week to have that second meeting. We're more likely than not going to be contacting you early next week, because one of the things that delayed us a little bit was the necessary utility survey that we needed to do, and also we had to go back and survey all this area, because that's one of the things that came out of the first stakeholders meeting, was adding this as a additional component. What happens with the roundabout when the roundabout is in place and you have traffic turning onto Church Street and onto Route 9 and it gets backed up? Church Street backs up down into the Spring and Main intersection if there's issues on Highland Avenue. I think that those issues, although it is they do trickle down into the Sassanora Plaza area, I haven't often seen them back all the way up into Spring and Main, but I will say that in the event that they would back up all the way down Main, if you're traveling up the Highland Avenue down to here, if you had a conventional intersection there, you would be left with gridlock, very much like you see on Highland and Church now. With a roundabout, it would become, and not to be silly about it, but it would really become a level of courtesy where you won't have to stop. You would be able to pull into the roundabout. If it actually did back up all the way past the roundabout, it would just be a matter of courtesy for someone coming in, knowing someone's trying to enter, them entering in. Versus if you had a signalized intersection, if it backed all the way up, it would very likely end up in the gridlock situation that you have on the top of Church and Highland Avenue right now. And as far as emergency vehicles associated with a backup into the roundabout, that's really one of the key components in what the jumpable curbs, which is a component of the design, and the island facilitate, is areas for emergency vehicle access to divert from the traffic. Is the DOT one of the agencies that will be contacted during the secret process? I'm going to let Joe talk about that a little bit, but this is not a state DOT project. State DOT may be considered an interested party, but state DOT, short of utilizing the necessary DOT design requirements, which our engineer is doing, are not involved in any of the review. It's just our consultant engineer that's implementing the state DOT design requirements and the Maintenance Uniform Protection of Traffic Control Manual. When will we have an updated drawing of the intersection design? I'm going to talk a little bit about the schedule in a bit. That was a summary of the questions that came from some of the social media and the board. I want to talk about some items that didn't come through from many of the public, but stuff that I want to bring to your attention. One of them was, and you know, I'm happy that there's so much activity and interest in the project, but sometimes some of the social media or some of the grapevine conversations can get away from people, and it might lead to some misrepresentation of what's actually going on. So nothing's been bid yet, nothing's been determined yet, contractors haven't been selected yet. This project is going to go forth the same as every project's done in my tenure here. There's going to be a public bid, there's going to be a bid review after a design document was laid on the street, and there's going to be an award based on qualifications, and we're going to go forth. and that contractor is going to be a licensed contractor. He's going to be a prevailing wage contractor, and he is going to be required to implement and follow through with every component to municipal construction that every contractor has done in my tenure here. There was an instance which I don't want to say it's not okay. It just can lead to some misrepresentation. But the consultant engineer was contacted via email from a resident or business owner, and they deferred that to me. So, in the vein of getting back to that person, this is the response. It's really best to stick to presentations like this to gather your information and to make your decisions. And like I said, between the board's outreach and the meetings that we're going to continue to have, hopefully we're going to answer every single question that one may have with regard to the project. Even if it's an individual concern and it is important only to you, please ask it and we will try to answer it. This is some of the schedule. I'm not going to talk about the secret schedule, Joe. I'll leave that to you, but it really is a parallel track. But if you remember the contract that we put in front of the public and the board when we retained Mazer Consulting, we're up to phase 2.1 now, which is the layout, grading, and drainage. Because we have all the site survey work and the utility survey work done, and the additional surveying work that we did for the potential parking lot component, we anticipate having the layout, grading, and drainage designed work done by mid-March, and then some of the preliminary landscaping presentations, because I do want to bring the board into that component, because the aesthetics is one area that even the engineer typically wants to defer to the board and the public and the other stakeholders that are coming into these other meetings, like the HPC and the downtown development and that group, particularly HPC and the aesthetic component. So once we get that developed, that's going to become part of the stakeholder meeting. But that first blush is going to be done probably by the end of the month, and that's when I'll be reaching out for you all, and we'll take it from there, because that's when we want to have another meeting so we can continue this very aggressive schedule. Up there, what you see there now is what we're going to call a rendering. That rendering, and again, Joe will go over a little more detail, that rendering was necessary to be completed now. It's nice to have it for this meeting to talk to it, but it's also a component of the environmental assessment forms that Joe is filling out as part of the secret process. But he'll talk about that in a little more detail. Another very large component, I know this is really important to the businesses in particular, is the MPT plan, or I referenced it earlier, the maintenance and protection of traffic. That's going to be done probably in about 3 weeks. That's what's going to dictate what we're going to tell the contractor he needs to do with regard to maintenance of pedestrian safety, traffic flow, parking, his laydown area, his mobilization areas, when he can operate, when he can't, when he could start, when he has to finish, what lighting he needs to maintain, and all the components that this village is committed and the project team is committed to maintaining access and both vehicular and pedestrian access to all the businesses that are impacted by this construction project. All the parties that may have the village fair, the Portuguese fair, or the farmers market, we want to maintain all of that throughout the summer of construction, and also make sure that the end result will nurture those same businesses and those same efforts, and you know, I'd like to think maybe even improve them. But again, that's probably in about 2 to 3 weeks. The bid documents themselves, and again, this is dependent on secret because that has to be done prior, are probably going to be ready for bidding in mid-April, and we might put them out on the street to solicit bids sometime in early May. And if we do that, and we can quickly turn around, if we get a worthwhile contractor, and if we can quickly turn around his front-end document requirements, and because there is no real long lead items associated with this type of construction, which versus a conventional intersection, there would be some lead time associated with the procurement of like mast arms and signals and instrumentation and what have you. This is really a true brick and mortar project. It's really a landscaping project, if you will, because it's basically consists of concrete and curb and you know, components like that that are not long lead items at all. And because of that, we look to go right from the letting of the contract right into mobilization in the field in a very short time, because we're really looking to keep this within a 4-month construction window so we can get this done by early fall. You know, it may trickle into the beginning of the school year, but I think the majority of interruption work and the inconvenience work we really need to get done in the summer. To stay away from the bus traffic and a lot of the train station traffic, because it does simmer down a little bit with folks going on vacation versus work in Manhattan. But we're still looking at that 4-month window for this construction. One thing that come up recently was we put it in the model, but because there was talk about how Westchester B-Line system was going to start implementing new buses and, you know, similar to the ones, the articulating buses they had some time ago. So our engineer actually, we made connection with him with the B-Line service, and they went over, just like they did with the fire department, their anticipated bus sizing, the same way the fire department gave the specifications to the design engineer on the largest ladder truck apparatus, and we put them into the model associated with the intersection and any of the routes that are considered in the future, and any of the vehicles that Westchester B-Line is going to consider using in the future, all pass in the model. The only time there is a slight issue with a bus navigating the roundabout as it presently is designed is a bus that would be coming up Central Avenue and making a right turn onto Main Street, which does not happen in B-Line. Didn't anticipate that happening in the future as one of their routes. So I think we're covered on that end. Another entity that I just spoke with as recently today, but are definitely going to be in the loop is Con Ed. If some folks remember, about 10, maybe 12 years ago, they came up with a high-pressure gas line that they installed right up Central Avenue, right through the middle of the intersection up Church Street. That was a large utility project for them, and they're very sensitive to that line. It's like an oil-cooled line. It's very, it could be catastrophic. But this particular design does not require excavation in the area of that utility, but Con Ed will be in the loop for the entire project. And the more we take that utility survey that was just completed last week and we transpose it onto the design, we'll be able to drag those entities in to get more input into the final design. Now, the remaining utilities that are under the ground is the Department of Public Works, potable water, sanitary sewer, and stormwater, all of which are coordinated by the village. So rest assured those are going to be included. I will tell you as one sidebar, if the folks remember when we first started presenting doing this, we were looking to do it this summer, and the following summer we were looking to do the Broadway Bridge, because it would be very short-sighted to undertake both at the same time. That's the other reason we're looking for the compressed schedule. I mentioned it in one meeting, but since there's a larger crowd here, I'll say that we were not successful in securing the grant award for the Broadway Bridge, but we're still looking to accomplishing that next summer. But I did solicit a phone meeting with the group that was responsible for not giving us the grant, and they that's set up as early as tomorrow, but I'm still waiting to hear from them. But I did get an unofficial advanced hint that they might be letting some more money, they might be letting a little more money trickle out of Albany into this same program. So I don't want to give up on that grant yet. That's something that we might resubmit prior to construction summer of 2018. So I will keep you updated on that. And I don't know how appropriate that was to interject here, but I did want to say it, so now I did. This is an appropriate time to turn it over to Joe Tremelli. Again, he's our engineering and planning consultant from Kellard Sessions, and he is coordinating with Mazer and interested parties relative to the secret process. Joe.
Thank you, Paul. So, as you mentioned, we were tasked with preparing the necessary secret documents for this project. For those of you that don't know, seeker is just a means by which the state provides rules and regulations, guidelines for environmental assessment of a given project. The seeker regulations divide projects into one of three categories, either a type 1, type 2, or unlisted. Type 2 actions are the relatively, I don't want to say mundane, but more frequent. For instance, maintenance of a town road, repaving a road, construction of a single-family home on an approved lot. Things of that nature that have been basically predetermined to have little or no impact with regards to environment. Projects that fit into that category are categorically exempt from the secret process. If a project's determined to be a type 2 action, that's the end of the secret process. Type 1 actions are projects of a larger scale and scope. They also include things like a comprehensive plan prepared by a municipality, zone text amendments, things of that nature. And then unlisted actions are just that. They don't fit in either category, and they need to be looked at in their own kind of vacuum. The first alternative, the conventional intersection, for instance, would have most likely fallen into a type 2 action or a type 2 category. That would have been largely within the existing roadbed, curb to curb. Not many, I haven't seen it, but I don't envision it would have had many changes from what you see out there today. Obviously, with the roundabout, that scope increased in size a little bit. It doesn't quite fit the definition of a type 2 project of this nature. And just quickly, just have the seeker regulation here. Type 2 actions that are specific to roadway projects include the installation of traffic control devices on existing streets, roads, and highways. And they give some examples, and that would include things like signs, signals, rumble strips, road shoulders, lane restrictions, restriping lanes, and reconfiguring traffic lanes within existing paved areas. So had this roundabout been wholly within the limits of the existing roadbed, again, it may have qualified as a type 2 action. But it doesn't, and given the added scope with the Market Square and the improved parking, it further pushes it out of the type 2 category. It also does not fall into a type 1 category, so it's an unlisted action. In addition to that, the project is either contiguous to or partially within the downtown Ossining Historic District, the area to the north and east of Main Street is the downtown historic district. There are also a number of listed buildings, historic buildings, along that stretch. So coupling that with an unlisted action triggers the need for the secret process. So what we've done is reviewed the plans with the consulting engineer, Mazer, and working with them, pulled the information together necessary to complete the long-form environmental assessment form. And that's a document that we've prepared. There's 3 parts to it. Parts 1 and 2 we've prepared on behalf of the village. Obviously, it's their document. They'll review it, and they'll use that in their determination as to the environmental significance of this project. With that, there are either involved or interested agencies that are listed as part of the secret process. The only involved agency in this case is the Village of Ossining, the village board. They are the only agency that would be involved as far as a permitting or approval authority. There are a number of interested agencies on this project, and they include the Office of Parks and Recreation Historic Preservation, SHPO, the DOT, just because of its proximity to Route 9,
As Paul mentioned earlier, this is not a state road. If it were, they'd be an involved agency. But they're not, so they're just interested. The village's EAC, the Environmental Advisory Council, and the HPC. They're both interested parties, as well as the Westchester County Planning Board. So next steps for this process would be for us to present or provide the draft long-form environmental assessment form to the village board for their review. We've already prepared a resolution for the village board to consider next week, which simply is their declaration to be the lead agency. It's just the village board saying, this is our project, we want to lead it, we're the approval authority. And with that resolution, there's also a draft notice that goes out. So if the board were to adopt the resolution next week, declaring themselves the lead agency, the next day we would then circulate a notice to the involved and interested parties, and that would include a copy of the long-form environmental assessment form, the rendering and site plan for the project, as well as, the EAF, the plans, and the rendering. Those would go to all the interested agencies listed here, and that would start a 30-day clock. And within that 30-day period, the involved and interested agencies have an opportunity to declare their objection or state their objection to the village's intent to be lead and actually request that they become lead. In this particular instance, the only involved agency is the village board, so that's unlikely. And at the end of the 30-day clock, the board, if they were in the position to do so, could then issue a decision or determination as to whether or not the project is environmentally, the impact is environmentally significant or not. As I mentioned, on the interested agency list are, there's 5 interested parties, a couple of which I'm sure will be very vocal and have some comment. SHPO being one, because of the proximity to the historic district. DOT may or may not have some concern, and then obviously the village's EAC and HPC committees. Those discussions have already begun with some of the staff level meetings and meetings such as this with the local groups, and that will continue through the process. But after the 30-day window, and once we've received comment from the interested agencies, those will be evaluated by the village, and those that require or those that are considered to have maybe some environmental significance will be addressed to a point where the village can then determine whether or not the project has an adverse impact from an environmental standpoint. Once they're comfortable that they've satisfied any comments from an environmental impact standpoint, they can then declare the or adopt a resolution for a negative declaration, a neg deck, the term you've probably heard watching these meetings. And that would then, if that were to be issued, that would then close the environmental, the seeker aspect of the project. It doesn't mean that any remaining comments from any of the agencies would not be addressed or would not be evaluated any further. It's it's simply an end to the environmental impact aspect of the project. So maybe some comments from, I don't know, SHPO about some of the, maybe the components that are going to be incorporated, the type of brick or the type of light fixture. Those aren't necessarily environmental impacts. It doesn't mean that the village wouldn't address them or continue to follow through in their review of those comments and concerns. So, Mayor, what we'll have for you for the next meeting is a draft resolution that will, if you so choose, you will adopt and you'll declare yourself the lead agent. With that will be a draft notice that will be circulated. And as I said, that will start the 30-day clock for the seeker process. And at the end of the 30 days, I'm assuming we won't have any objection to the village board being lead. As I said, that would be unlikely. We'll wait to hear back from the interested agencies, compile their comments, and deal with it then. So at a minimum, it's the 30-day clock, just getting to your schedule. That'll put us into the first week of April. We have no idea what we're gonna get back from SHPO or any of the agencies for that matter. So depending on the level of the comments and concerns and questions that come out of this, will determine the time needed to respond. And that back and forth may take a little while. But as I said, once the village board is at a point where they're comfortable with the plan from an environmental significance standpoint, you could then issue the neg deck, and the secret process is closed, and you could then go, when the plans are ready, you can go out to bid and let the contract.
Thank you. And as a good segue is what I stated in the, I think the legislative meeting 2 weeks ago, was that if all these components aren't in place and we don't have everything we need to have a lock solid contract put on the street for bidding, we're not going to do that. We're going to make sure that the documents that we put on the street are going to get exactly what interested parties are expecting as part of the secret process, and exactly what the engineer is requesting and requiring to implement the design that the village wants to see in its downtown. So with that, I'll ask the board if they have any expanding they want me or Joe to do on anything that was stated tonight, or if they have any additional questions that I didn't cover with the question list that I read through earlier. And I don't have any more slides, so I would like to keep that up.
Keep it up if we're gonna talk
Well,
about it.
if we're going to reference it, I just assume keep it up and we talk from here. Sure.
Yeah, that's good. Does anybody, what questions do we have for Paul and Joe? I mean, I gave you a list of questions and you read through all of them.
read all
and-
the questions.
So, those are
That we've
questions that we've been
gotten.
compiling for
Yeah.
quite some time, so.
I'll reiterate it again because it's important. I've had some very engaged conversations in the last couple of weeks over the phone at my desk, and it doesn't really matter your position on this project or not. A question is a question, and I will answer it as thoroughly as possible. So please feel free to reach out.
Just one quick question. When we talk about sidewalks and I guess the crosswalks being ADA compliant, what does that exactly mean?
ADA, acronym for American with Disabilities Act, I believe. It means that, I'm going to use my pointer here, interfaces with the sidewalk where you are going to leave the curb line and enter the thoroughfare and then back into the safe haven and then back into the thoroughfare are all able to be traveled with a wheelchair. There's no interruption of that level beyond a 1/12 pitch for a length of 30 feet, and there's a flat spot every 30 feet, and there's other components to it like the width of the minimum width required for the ADA compliance, but essentially allows someone that has physically disabled, either walking typically or is wheelchair bound, to get from a handicap space like that will exist over here, or the handicap spaces that we have painted over here, to exit their car safely with the appropriate handicap hatching over here to allow them to open the door, or allow someone to open a door and assist someone else out, and they can either assisted or unassisted travel in a wheelchair from any point to any point around the entire.
I did have, and thanks for getting the updated rendering. It's helpful to be able to look at it and see where the crosswalks really will be. I think the most challenging corner is the central Brandreth, and it was actually the description in the seeker documents that were forwarded to us that clarified for me, I think, how I understand how it'll work, because it's really being treated like, it's described in the seeker documents as a four entrance roundabout, and there will obviously not be lights, but there will be stop signs at both Brandreth and Central. So can you describe for me somebody driving when cars drive up Brandwidth and when cars drive up Central, how do they navigate this? And how is it going to be intuitive for them the way it is at the other intersections where there's a lot more room and it's a more obvious entrance?
The stop bar for Brandreth is here. And stop bar for Central is here. And just as you would any other intersection, and I believe they brought this up a little bit so you can have a sight, a line of sight with someone that could potentially be stopped here. And then it becomes the rules of the road. If you're coming on a stop sign but there's already someone here, you defer the right of way to here and they can enter the roundabout here prior to this person entering the roundabout here. So it's just as any other intersection. You stop, as there's no one there, you enter the roundabout. Coming up Brandreth, you stop. If there's no one on Central, you enter the roundabout. Stopping is also going to permit you to avoid a collision with someone exiting the roundabout to either go down Brandreth or down Central. So it basically is a little mini intersection here before you enter the roundabout. And that design was really necessitated by the first vision of the engineer was to make this one way, but the emergency services personnel objected to that, and I actually agreed with that, and so did most of the project team. But it really, from an engineering perspective, was the best way for traffic flow and for the design to work here without the stop signs and the like. But as far as access and emergency personnel and response time, etc., we maintained two-way traffic on Brandreth. One thing that's not on this rendering that it kind of got maybe lost a little bit, but it didn't get lost in the project team that will make its way into the contract documents, is a little further down on Spring Street Spring Street at the intersection of Maple. There will be a additional crosswalk crossing the two-way traffic that will be also supplemented with ADA accessibility. So we'll drop the curbs in both sides of the street there. There's
Now there's no crosswalk on Spring between Main and Broad?
Maple and
No, but the only, there is no crosswalk, there's no crosswalk in existence on Spring Street. Right, all the way until you get to Broad, I think.
Just cross.
There's no safe crossing for all the elderly.
No,
Yeah.
I'm saying that.
Or
It's
anyway.
like you just jog across. Thanks.
Okay,
thank you.
we still have a lengthy next session, and so if we could maintain quiet for a few moments while we wrap up. Can we have a motion to adjourn to executive session for discussion of personnel regarding specific persons?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Okay.
All in favor of adjourning for executive session?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much. Please join us next week on March 1st at the Birdsall Fagan Police Court facility for our legislative meeting. This meeting is adjourned to executive session.